So, what I want to do is talk to you about the churches of Christ, not like the Boston movement, not the international churches of Christ. I'm like from a mainstream church of Christ. And a lot of people say that churches of Christ are a cult. And so I want to go over some of the arguments with you, but I want you to present the arguments as your own. And I want you to kind of spar back and forth with me about this. Can you do that?
All right, let's dive into this. I'll present arguments about whether mainstream churches of Christ could be considered a cult, taking a critical stance, and we can go back and forth. I'll keep it conversational, fair, and stick to the mainstream churches of Christ, not the Boston movement or international churches of Christ. Here we go. Some folks argue that churches of Christ have cult-like traits because of their strict adherence to specific doctrines, like a capital worship, or the belief that they're the only ones getting salvation right. The emphasis on biblical literalism and practices like disfellowshipping can feel controlling, almost like a group demanding total conformity. That kind of exclusivity, they say, mirrors how cults isolate members and create an us versus them mindset. What's your take on that? Does the exclusivity in churches of Christ feel controlling to you, or is it just a commitment to their interpretation of Scripture?
I think that there can be controlling people in any subset, in any group, religious or otherwise. But at the same time, what I don't understand about this criticism, both on the instrumental music one and just the salvation, getting that right in general one, what I don't understand about that is, isn't Christianity itself very exclusive? Aren't all Christians, don't they draw the line somewhere? So why is it that churches of Christ, we get this criticism for being a cult when we all draw the line somewhere? People just for arbitrary reasons don't like where we draw these lines. And I don't even think we draw the lines in ways that are deeply extreme. If really we draw the line just because we see this stuff plainly taught in Scripture. I'm debating the Grok AI and whether or not we are a cult. But one thing that should not be debatable is you liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and considering supporting on Patreon. Let me know what you think. I love you very much.
You're making a solid point. Christianity as a whole can feel exclusive because it sets boundaries on belief and practice, like accepting Christ as the only way to salvation. Most denominations draw lines somewhere, whether it's Catholics with their sacraments or Baptists with their view on baptism. So, why do churches of Christ catch extra heat for being cult-like? One argument is that it's not just about drawing lines, but how they're enforced. Critics might say churches of Christ can lean hard into uniformity. Like, if you question a capital worship or their take on baptism's necessity for salvation, you're not just wrong, you're risking your place in the community. That can feel like a cult's control tactic, where dissent isn't just disagreement, but a threat to the group's identity. I hear you on Scripture being your guide. Seems like you see it as staying true to the text. But do you think the way some congregations handle dissent, like with social pressure or shunning, amps up that cult perception?
Well, I don't know if I want to describe it as like social pressure or shunning simply. This is a process that is described in 1 Corinthians 5, 2 Thessalonians 3, verse number 14. There is something called like the removal of fellowship, disfellowship, or excommunication is the word that's often used like in the Catholic Church, for example. But it's fascinating to me. Again, people say like, I don't like why churches of Christ, they give such an emphasis about a cappella worship, or why they give such an emphasis about baptism and they draw lines there. I mean, aren't worship and salvation very important issues? And isn't it virtually impossible to be in true fellowship with someone who you believe is not leading people to Christ in the way that he is commanded? Again, is this leaning hard into uniformity? Couldn't I just say that, all Christianity in general leans too hard into uniformity when it comes to something like the Trinity?
You're absolutely right that Scripture, like 1 Corinthians 5 and 2 Thessalonians 3:14, lays out a process for removing fellowship. And churches of Christ aren't unique in having some form of discipline. Catholics have excommunication, and other groups have their own versions. The argument for calling it cult-like, though, often hinges on how that process feels in practice. Critics might say that in some churches of Christ, the line between biblical discipline and social control gets blurry. Like, if someone questions a capital worship or the necessity of baptism for salvation, they're not just corrected, but ostracized in a way that feels personal, not just doctrinal. You're spot on that worship and salvation are heavy-hitting issues, so it makes sense to take them seriously. But here's where critics push back. They argue churches of Christ don't just prioritize these issues, but sometimes act like they've cracked the code on truth, dismissing other Christians as off the mark. You mentioned the Trinity as a Christian boundary. Most denominations agree on it, But churches of Christ often stand out by saying their specific practices, like a capella or baptism's role, are non-negotiable for true fellowship. Do you think that stance, holding those as essential, sets churches of Christ apart in a way that invites the cult label? Or is it just them being consistent with what they see in Scripture?
I hear what you're saying. It just doesn't seem substantive enough for me. So, because it sounds like what you're saying in the beginning is that the discipline itself is not an argument about the substance of the discipline as much as it is an argument from how the discipline feels. And I don't know how helpful it is to say, well, what you're doing may be biblical, but it doesn't feel nice to the person who's on the receiving end of it. Was the man who had his father's wife in 1 Corinthians 5, did it feel nice for him to be on the receiving end of this separation from the local church? Again, the people mentioned in 2 Thessalonians 3:14 who are to be admonished as brothers, did that feel nice for them? I'm sure it didn't feel great, but that definitely doesn't make a substantive argument towards one group being cultish or cult-like or something like that. I hope you see what I mean there. And also, I can agree, though, I will take this criticism right on the chin that sometimes members of churches of Christ are guilty of approaching difficult and complicated issues with little to no humility and not even leaving space for people to express differing views. Now, again, I think that that's the minority of people in churches of Christ. People do stand on their convictions, and every Christian should do that. But I've definitely experienced people approaching conversations over complicated matters with little to no humility, as if there's no way someone could ever have a differing view. And yeah, I agree with you there.
I hear you loud and clear. You're saying the feels bad argument against church discipline doesn't hold much water when Scripture, like 1 Corinthians 5 or 2 Thessalonians 3:14, explicitly calls for it. And yeah, it probably didn't feel great for the guy in Corinth or anyone on the receiving end, but that's not the point. Discipline's meant to correct, not coddle. Fair point. If it's biblical, the emotional sting doesn't automatically make it cultish. Critics might still argue, though, that it's not just the act of discipline, but the culture around it. When questioning core practices like a capella worship or baptism gets you sidelined fast, it can feel like loyalty to the group trumps open dialogue. You nailed it, though. Admitting some churches of Christ members can come off as rigid or lacking humility. That's huge. It's not everyone, like you said, but that minority can feel the cult perception when they shut down discussion like they've got the only key to truth. So, flipping it back, do you think churches of Christ could ease that perception by encouraging more open debate on non-essentials, or would that risk watering down what makes them distinct? I'm ready for you to hit back on this one.
Sure. I want to focus first on something that you said, that it feels like sometimes it is about loyalty to the group over open dialogue. Again, I don't think that we have to decide over loyalty to the group over open dialogue. I think we can have both of those things. There's definitely room for disagreement and healthy debate that should be had, even on critical issues. Not every Christian, not every member of Churches of Christ is going to have their doctrine ironed out. And in fact, just in the broad scope of it, no member of Churches of Christ completely has all of the doctrine, all of God's teaching ironed out. So again, I think that this is a little bit of a straw man when we act like this is kind of representative of some top-down or some overall culture in Churches of Christ. Maybe it's just a caricature. Maybe we'll put it that way. It's really more of a caricature than anything else. What was the second half of your question? I forgot it as I answered that first half.
The second part I was tossing at you was this. Could Churches of Christ dial down the cult perception by encouraging more open debate on non-essential issues? Or would that risk losing what makes them unique? Like, is there a way to keep the core convictions, say a capella worship or baptism's role, while loosening up on how dissent or questions are handled without diluting the identity? What's your take there?
Again, I think your question is assuming, though, that like the majority of people in Churches of Christ just have no time for questions on optional things or non-essential things. I think that's not the tone. That's not the overall culture in Churches of Christ. I really do think that is just a caricature of us that is brought about by people who criticize us all the time. But I will say this. Not only should we welcome dissent and disagreement, like healthy debate, healthy dialogue on non-essential issues, we should have it on essential issues. Why shouldn't we be sharpening one another? I'm not saying that we should just accept everyone's differing viewpoints. Again, how could we have unity if we're having all these differing viewpoints? And that's really our critique of the Protestant world itself. But we should be happy to have all of these open dialogues.
You're hitting on something big here, calling out that assumption as a caricature. Love the pushback. It sounds like you're saying the culture in churches of Christ isn't as closed off as critics painted, and there's already space for debate, even on essentials, to sharpen each other. That's a strong point. Iron sharpening iron doesn't mean shutting down questions, but engaging them, even if unity's the goal. Critics might counter, though, that while dialogue happens, the boundaries on essentials, like baptism or a capella worship, can feel like a litmus test for belonging. If someone openly questions those, they might not get kicked out, but the side-eye or pressure to conform can make it feel like dissent's unwelcome. You're saying that's not the norm, though, and dialogue's already part of the deal. So let me ask, are there specific practices or teachings in churches of Christ where you think more open debate could strengthen the community without fracturing that unity you mentioned? Like, where's the sweet spot for healthy debate?
Hold on,
Ready
though.
for your...
Sorry to interrupt. Well, hold on. You're talking as if every other Christian church has this issue. Everyone has boundaries. Every church that claims Christianity has this issue. They all have boundaries. They all draw the line somewhere, and they all have people who try to shut down conversation, shut down debate. This is not unique to churches of Christ. This is any church that claims Christianity, and I'm sure even across other religions, they have this. This is more of like a person issue rather than an overall culture limited and specific primarily to churches of Christ. And now, again, I don't need you to debate that point back to me. Give me another reason why churches of Christ might seem cult-like before we wrap up here.
Another reason some call churches of Christ cult-like is their strong emphasis on being the one true church.
If you want to see the rest of this conversation, it will be on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. You can see the extended version of this in every single video that I do. There's a lot more stuff on Patreon. If you're interested in that, you want to support the channel, the link is in the description below. Thank you very much.
All right, folks, if you're tuning in to In Between Sundays, hit that subscribe button, give the video a big ol' like, and drop a comment with your thoughts. We're dying to hear what you think about this debate. Also, if you're loving the content, consider supporting on Patreon to keep the good stuff coming. Thanks for hanging out with us.